Well, hello my friends. Greetings from Austin. It seems like a lot of things have changed since the very first time we started talking about watching films together. And now we've come to the end of things, and I've got a few ideas about Spike Lee's BlacKkKlansman that I'd like to talk about with you before inviting you to do some online discussion about it. So I'm thinking of this as kind of the culmination of the instruction, and then from here you're going to be writing and pulling things together, and I look forward to seeing the papers that you write for me. So the three things that I want to talk about today in connection with BlacKkKlansman. I want to talk first about the movie as a Spike Lee film, because we've watched more than one Spike Lee film, and so it's possible for us to do some comparison, contrast, figure out some things that help us understand him better as a filmmaker. Second, I want to talk about BlacKkKlansman as a historical film, because it's a film set in a historical period, and Hollywood has used historical films in a lot of different ways over the years, and this is a really interesting iteration of a Hollywood film using history. And then third, I want to talk about BlacKkKlansman as a political film, because although we hope that a work of art succeeds or fails on its own merit, it often, in fact almost always, is going to carry the different beliefs and opinions of its artist, filmmaker, composer, what have you. And so as we conclude, I'd like to think a little bit about this as a political film, because I know that some of you are really interested in politics and have had perhaps a reaction either positively or negatively to the political ideas that are expressed in the film. So first, let's start off by talking about BlacKkKlansman as a Spike Lee film. As with any art form, and honestly with like most things in life, so we can talk about composers or painters or directors, but we often talk about a body of work in all kinds of fields. We might talk about a gymnast. I mean, Simone Biles is somebody who is known for a certain sort of set of things that she does over and over and better, presumably. You could talk about a senator or a legislator who has a body of work and compare the new work that she or he is doing with that body of work. But in film, when we talk about a director and his or her body of work, we're using what is referred to as auteur criticism. Auteur is the French word meaning author, and it comes from French critics right after World War II who were looking at Hollywood films made in the studio system and saying that despite the sort of economic model that encouraged things to be streamlined on a production line, there were a number of filmmakers who made distinctive and individual films. And so auteur filmmaking is a way of thinking about a primary filmmaker as the author of those works. And so when we think about BlacKkKlansman as a Spike Lee film, when we try and apply auteur criticism to it, then there are several things that we do in attempting to understand him better as a filmmaker, and also this film in particular better as a work of art. So the first thing that we ask is, what are the stylistic devices that make this an identifiable Spike Lee film? What are things that he is doing in this film that you have seen him do previously in terms of cinematography or editing or music or his direction of actors or production design? What are some things that cinematically make this identifiably a Spike Lee film? What's different about it? How has he grown as a filmmaker from any earlier films that you're familiar with? So what is it that's similar that identifies this for us as a Spike Lee film? What is different that lets us know that he's either trying to accomplish something different in this film or that he has changed as an artist since the last time he came? We could think of auteur criticism in terms of story. What sorts of stories and characters does BlacKkKlansman use that he has used in previous films? What's different in that regard? Are there stock characters or stock situations that we could say are things that are stories that Spike Lee likes to tell, or kinds of characters that Spike Lee likes to use? And then thirdly, when we think about the ideas or themes behind the film, and we'll be doing this in more detail with our second two questions, but what are some of the things that you recognize that Spike Lee is interested in this film because you've seen earlier Spike Lee work? So what does he have to tell us about the life of the individual, about political life, about life in a community, about art and its importance? I mean, what are some of the things that he is doing here that you've seen him do before? And again, what is he doing that differs so that we can understand that either he's trying to accomplish something new or he is moving in a new direction or growing, changing as an artist? So that's the first question that I'm going to ask you to spend some time reflecting on canvas. What do we understand about BlacKkKlansman by thinking about it as a Spike Lee film? The second question that I'm going to have for you has to do with BlacKkKlansman as a history film. It is, of course, set in a recognizable era, the 1970s in America, but it's also a film that's very interested both in history and in film history. I mean, you'll remember that the first shots of the film are not actually directed by Spike Lee, but they're from the movie Gone with the Wind, the historical Civil War era epic from the Hollywood Golden Age. And then he jumps directly to a conversation with a white supremacist, and he projects the D.W. Griffith film Birth of a Nation over the Alec Baldwin character as he's speaking or ranting or however you want to identify it. So when I was at the Cathedral in D.C. A few weeks ago, I was on a panel on film and history in the afternoon. And I don't know that this is unique to me, but it occurred to me that there are three things that Hollywood film has tried to do with its use of history. In films like Birth of a Nation, where we're representing stereotypes, there is the very real possibility that film is being used to perpetuate stereotypes and racism. And this can often be done by either misrepresenting or not representing people of color, other minorities outside the white mainstream. So that's the first thing that history can be used to do. The second thing that history can be used to do is it can in some ways let its white audience off the hook because of the details of its story. So we can say, okay, this is how things used to be, this is how they are now. So Spike Lee could have made a film where he was purely historical and saying there used to be something called the Ku Klux Klan, and now there isn't. Except, of course, that's not real. And so any attempt to sort of say this is a problem we no longer have to deal with would be in some way an attempt to let its white audience off the hook, perhaps by giving them a feel-good ending and then saying this is how things used to be, but that's not how they are today. You're cool. Go on, citizen, there's nothing to see here. And then the third thing, which is what Spike Lee seems to be doing in this film, is using the history as a way of addressing and pushing back against both Hollywood's racist history and our own racist culture. And so one of the things that I think is particularly interesting about that is one of the reviews that I read for the film talks about the film as a period film only. The period is the past, the present, and the future. The idea in Spike Lee's film is that you're using history not just as a way of locating something in the past, but as you know, since you have seen the film, of bringing it up from the past to the present day and pushing back against, as we said, both Hollywood's racist history and our racist presence. And so Hollywood, which traditionally has had a sort of racist underlying theme and power structure, now has people of color, filmmakers of color, who are pushing back against the way that films have been made and the way history has been used. So the second question, I'm really interested in what you think about the way Spike Lee uses history, because as you'll remember early on, there's a title card that says, in effect, this stuff really happened, or some version of this stuff really happened, based on some for real stuff. Now, the third thing that I want to mention to you is the idea of Spike Lee's BlacKkKlansman as a political film. Because one of the things that we talked about together is the idea that Spike Lee is this sort of provocateur, and that one of the ways that he draws attention to his film, or his films, is by situating them as a response to the racist culture, the racist society that he grew up in, that he still perceives around us. And so there is a very powerful political sense to most of the films that he makes. Where do you find the politics located in this film? How does he use those films of the past? How does he use the historical elements as a way of bringing things up to date. And then, of course, he uses things that are up to date. He makes sort of insider references in the film, and the end of the film is updated, in a sense, to the present moment. Now, the thing that we have to recognize when we talk about the political dimension of art is that sometimes this powerfully appeals to people and sometimes it distances them. And so one of the things you might want to consider for this third response is, did the political content of BlacKkKlansman draw you into the film, or did it repel you? Was it an incitement to greater understanding and enjoyment, or did it make it harder for you to enter into the film gratefully and gladly? And I think that this is a useful thing for us to recognize, both in terms of our own political biases and the political biases of the filmmaker. A really nice recent analog is the Clint Eastwood film from last year called Richard Jewell. And Clint Eastwood is a great filmmaker, just as Spike Lee is, and Richard Jewell was very highly regarded by reviewers. But it's possible to look at that film and see Clint Eastwood's more conservative political bias. Richard Jewell is an everyman, a white middle-class guy who is attacked by the media and the deep state, and persecuted and put on trial, in a sense, for something that he didn't do. There's a powerful political statement in that film that you probably are aware of as you're watching it. And we have to sort of reckon with, do I put this away? Do I file this away? Does this offend me, or does this draw me in? So those are the three things that I'm going to ask you to think about on Canvas. And so I'm going to look forward to those, and I'm going to look forward to your papers, which will sort of sum up the work we've done together this semester. This has not been the semester we expected, and I think for many of us, not the semester that we wanted. But I'm truly grateful for the chance to have engaged in these conversations with you, and I hope that there are things that you've learned that will be useful to you moving forward. And I hope and pray that you are at this moment safe and well, and I look forward to hearing from you all. Thank you so much.